You know someone who has had cancer. Statistically, you probably know several: a parent, a coworker, a friend of a friend, gone too soon, or somehow still here stubbornly against the odds. It's the disease everyone half expects to touch their life eventually, and yet after more than 50 years of dedicated research, after a literal moonshot declared on it by a sitting president, cancer is still here, still killing millions of people every year. The real reason isn't a lack of effort. It's far stranger than that. Picture the year 1971. President Richard Nixon signs the National Cancer Act. Newspapers call it a war. The language is deliberate, almost military. Defeat the enemy, find the cure, declare victory. It's the same confident tone that had just put a man on the moon 2 years earlier. If humans could reach another world, surely they could conquer a disease. But cancer never had a single face to defeat, and that turned out to be the entire problem. Here's the sentence that changes everything you thought you knew. Cancer isn't one disease. It's hundreds of wearing the same name. Consider the sheer scale of what curing cancer actually asks for. There are over 200 distinct types of cancer recognized today, each originating in a different tissue, driven by different mutations, growing at different speeds, responding to completely different treatment. Asking for a single cure is a little like asking for a single fix for every kind of car trouble that exists, from a dead battery to a cracked engine block to a flat tire, and expecting one tool to handle all of it. Breast cancer and pancreatic cancer share almost nothing in common except the word cancer itself. Even within a single tumor, cells don't behave identically. They mutate differently. They grow at different speeds. Some respond to treatment, others quietly don't. You're not fighting one enemy, you're fighting an army where every soldier has a different weakness, and the army keeps recruiting new soldiers as the battle goes on. This idea has deep roots in a discovery most people have never heard of. In 1976, pathologist Peter Noel proposed something that reshaped how scientists understand tumors entirely. He suggested that cancer behaves like a miniature version of evolution itself. A single cell mutates. That mutation gives it a slight survival advantage. It divides, and its descendants inherit that advantage. Then, another mutation appears, and another. Cell by cell, generation by generation, the tumor evolves inside your own body in real time, favoring whichever cells happen to survive best. Think about what that actually means. Every treatment you throw at a tumor becomes a selection pressure, exactly like a drought or a predator in nature. The cells vulnerable to that treatment die off. The ones with a lucky mutation that resists it survive and multiply. You're not killing the cancer. In some cases, you're accidentally breeding a stronger version of it. This is why a chemotherapy drug that shrinks a tumor beautifully for 6 months can suddenly stop working entirely. It's not that the drug got weaker, it's that the tumor evolved past it. Doctors have a name for this pattern now: acquired resistance. It shows up again and again across nearly every cancer type and nearly every drug class ever developed. A treatment that once looked like a miracle in early trials quietly loses its power in a subset of patients, sometimes months later, sometimes years later. For a long time, researchers assumed resistance meant the drug had failed. Nowell's framework suggested something different. The drug hadn't failed. It had simply done exactly what selection pressure always does. It cleared the field for whatever was left standing. So how do you fight something that adapts to your weapons in real time? This is where researcher Charles Swanton enters the story. Through a massive ongoing study called TraceRx, Swanton and his team have tracked tumors as they grow and spread inside real patients, sampling different regions of the same tumor to see how much they differ from each other. What they found was unsettling. A single tumor can contain wildly different genetic populations of cancer cells living side by side, like different neighborhoods within the same city, each one slightly different from the next. That means a biopsy taken from one part of a tumor might miss a dangerous mutation sitting just a few centimeters away. Doctors could be treating what looks like one disease, while a hidden, drug-resistant population quietly survives untouched, waiting for its moment. Here's the twist that reframes the whole 50-year effort. Curing cancer was never really the right framing. You cannot declare victory over evolution. Evolution doesn't have a single weak point to exploit because it doesn't hold still long enough to have one. And yet, something remarkable has happened anyway. Survival rates for many cancers have climbed dramatically since that 1971 declaration of war. Childhood leukemia, once almost always fatal, now has survival rates above 85% in many countries. That number represents an enormous scientific achievement. It just doesn't look like the single dramatic breakthrough people were promised. Notice too that this progress hasn't been evenly distributed. Pediatric cancers in general tend to respond far better to treatment than most adult cancers, partly because children's tumors often carry fewer accumulated mutations, giving them less genetic diversity to hide behind. An adult tumor, by contrast, may have been quietly evolving for a decade or more before it was ever detected, accumulating exactly the kind of internal variety that makes Swanton's TraceRx findings so troubling. Time itself becomes an ally of the disease, which is part of why age remains one of the single biggest risk factors for cancer of almost every type. Biologist Robert Weinberg helped explain why progress had to look this way. In his influential framework describing the hallmarks of cancer, Weinberg identified the specific biological traits that let a normal cell become a tumor: the ability to ignore signals that should stop growth, the ability to avoid programmed cell death, the ability to trick the immune system into ignoring it entirely. Each of these hallmarks became its own separate research problem, its own decades-long puzzle. Curing cancer was never one question. It was always dozens of interlocking questions, and each one needed its own answer. This is why modern treatment increasingly doesn't look like a single cure at all. It looks like a toolkit. Immunotherapy, which trains a patient's own immune system to recognize cancer cells it was previously blind to. Targeted therapy, drugs engineered to attack the exact mutation driving a specific tumor, and only that mutation. CAR T-cell therapy, which takes a patient's own immune cells, genetically reprograms them in a lab, and sends them back into the body as custom-built hunters. Take checkpoint inhibitors as one example inside that toolkit. Normally, your immune system has built-in brakes, molecular checkpoints that stop it from attacking your own healthy tissue. Some cancers have learned to hijack those exact brakes, essentially waving a white flag at your immune system and convincing it to leave the tumor alone. Checkpoint inhibitor drugs work by releasing that brake, letting the immune system see the tumor clearly again. For certain cancers, particularly advanced melanoma, this single idea has turned what was once a near-certain death sentence into a disease some patients now live with for years. For other cancer types, the same drugs barely move the needle at all. Same brake, same release mechanism, wildly different outcome, because the underlying biology of the tumor decides everything. None of these are magic bullets. Each one works incredibly well for some patients and barely at all for others because the underlying biology is different every time. What looks from the outside like frustratingly slow progress is actually the accumulation of an enormous number of narrow, specific victories stacked one on top of another. Cost and access complicate this picture further in ways that rarely make it into the hopeful headline. A CAR T therapy can involve extracting a patient's cells, shipping them to a specialized lab, genetically engineering them, and shipping them back, a process that can take weeks and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not a failure of science. It's a reminder that even a genuine breakthrough doesn't instantly become a cure available to everyone who needs it. Scaling a miracle is its own separate, unglamorous kind of hard. There's another piece of this story that rarely gets attention outside research circles. Detection matters just as much as treatment. A tumor caught early, when it's a small, relatively uniform group of cells, is far easier to treat than one that has had years to evolve internal diversity. This is part of why cancer screening programs, uncomfortable and inconvenient as they can be, have had such an outsized impact on survival statistics. You're not just looking for cancer, you're racing against its evolution, trying to catch it before it has time to diversify into something harder to corner. Think about what all of this means for how you understand your own body. Cancer isn't an invading army from outside, it's a mutiny from within, made possible by the exact same mechanism that let your ancestors adapt, survive, and evolve across millions of years. The same biological creativity that built the human immune system, that let early humans survive ice ages and endless rain and every other threat this series has walked through, is also, quietly, capable of turning against you. Evolution doesn't care whose side it's on. It simply rewards whatever survives. That's an uncomfortable thought, but it's also, in a strange way, a hopeful one. Because the same relentless human problem-solving instinct that built rock shelters and treated hides and division of labor fire crews is now being pointed directly at this problem. Thousands of researchers in thousands of labs, chipping away at hundreds of different diseases that all happen to share one name, not one war. Hundreds of smaller, quieter ones, each slowly being won. You know someone who has had cancer. Maybe they're a survivor today because of a treatment that didn't exist 20 years ago. Maybe you will be too someday because of a treatment that doesn't exist yet. That's not the ending anyone imagined back in 1971. It's slower, messier, and far less cinematic than a single moonshot cure. But it might be the only kind of victory this particular enemy was ever going to allow.